Well, hello. This is another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. We have an update for you. Recently, college professor Timothy Waters, the author of Boxing Pandora, was interviewed on a podcast where he talked about Calexit and Texit. And he said that Calexit was unlikely to happen because it's both marginal in support and everyone in California still wants to be an American. We'll cover how accurate that is and whether the professor was right or really wrong based upon the statistics. We'll show you what the professor said. We'll show you the context, and we'll show you the information that we found here at Yes California, all coming up right after this. Well, we're going to get right to the interview and let the information do the talking. And then you can make up your mind if the professor was correct or if he was not. That'll be up to you. All right, well, let's take a look right now. I'm going to share screen and we'll walk you through the information. We'll take it from there. Here's the interview. It was called Secession, Part 2, today and maybe tomorrow on Deep Dive with Sean Fettig. Came out about 5 days ago. He interviewed Dr. Timothy Waters at the Maurer School at Law at Indiana University, the author of Boxing Pandora, Rethinking Border States and Secession in a Demographic World. Full disclosure, I was also interviewed as the second guest and the leader of Calexit. But what happened was that after I did my interview with Sean Fettig, he did an interview with the professor, and then he did an interview with me. And then after he was done with me, he went back to the professor and asked the professor some questions about the likelihood of Calexit, which he did not ask me. So Sean asked me a series of questions. It was great. I encourage everybody to look at the interview. But then there were a few more questions he asked the professor, and he didn't ask me, and my answers were never included in the interview, which makes it seem as though I didn't have an answer, or there wasn't a good answer, or that the professor's response on the likelihood of Calexit was the final way to think about it. Well, I disagree, and I'll let you decide, the public, so let's get right into it. Here you go.
A majority of Americans voted for Trump. If Trump wins again, this comfort blanket that Californians used of, oh, it's a fluke, he doesn't represent the USA, because they said he doesn't represent America for years, is all gone. The stark, naked reality of a majority of Americans outside of California like Trump and like what he stands for is going to have to be accepted. In 2016, Californians didn't do that. They pursued Calexit, but they also pursued the resist movement, which said, just get Trump out, America's fine, and everything will pop back into place. Well, America did not pop back into place. And if Trump gets elected, those comfort blankets that Californians use to suppress the support for Calexit will be gone. They won't be there. There's not going to be a foreign country rigged the election again. You know, this is a fluke again. People didn't know who they were voting for again. It's just going to be, wow, goddamn, I guess America is racist. And when that happens, that epiphany, there's no coming back from that.
Obviously, that was me. We're now going to go to Sean Fettig, who you can see do an introduction and then ask
Mark's response here
the professor.
That if Trump, or maybe any politician in Trump's image, was to be elected in 2024, that there would be a serious and formal secession movement amongst not just elites and politicians in California, but the general public, the citizenry of California, made me wonder what that might look like. So I asked Dr. Waters about this.
What's the likelihood of any successful secession movements in the United States in the near future? I think extremely low. Again, these groups are marginal for a reason. It's not just because we fought a civil war over it, but that's certainly in the background. The fact of, a violent and successful suppression of secession. But as I said, this in the 150, however many years since, we have quite successfully created an integrated political identity for all of our polarization. Most people on both sides of our great political divide perceive themselves to be patriotic Americans. The risk more is that they're afraid the other side isn't. But it's not that either side itself wishes to defect from the idea of America. And that's significant because it means that the support for these exit groups is going to be marginal and small. And that's just not true in every country in the world. There are places where almost everyone would say, I have no interest in breaking up this state, and other countries where large parts of the population would say, I'd be happy to divide it tomorrow. We're in the former category for all our polarization, I believe. So I think there's very little prospect of serious movement, quite apart from the legal and constitutional obstacles.
Okay, so there it is, secession. Let's recap. We are living through highly partisan, highly polarized, and especially divisive times. But it's not new or unique. As Dr. Schulten reminded me last week, elected officials were literally beating each other in the congressional chambers in the 1800s. And we did experience a civil war, for God's sake. But still, as Marcus Ruiz Evans explained, something is going on, and it's not just grievances related to a president or a party we don't like. There are serious cultural differences between some of us that seem more and more irreconcilable. And so secession, while it can act as a release valve, a way to bring the temperature down, as Dr. Waters explained, the likelihood of that happening is, well, almost non-existent. So if the idea of secession in the United States in the near future makes you anxious, you can take a breath. For the rest of you, though, if secession seems like it might be a decent option to avoid conflict, to fully realize self-determination in how we are governed, well, maybe you can relax, but it might be worth questioning what it means to be American and doesn't mean anything to you anymore. If it doesn't, then Marcus has a petition for you to sign in California.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate the introduction. So what you largely saw there was these two things. One, they're having an interview on secession, and Sean is a very intelligent man. I enjoyed my interview with him. He was very kind and asked a lot of questions. It was great. But then he asked Professor Timothy Waters, who wrote a book on secession and is a university professor, about the likelihood of successful secession movements. The two questions that Timothy Waters was asked was, one, what is the likelihood of any successful secession movement? In quotes, I think it's extremely low. These groups are marginal. That's what Professor Timothy Waters said. I think it's extremely low that Calexit or Texit would happen because these groups are marginal. The other thing that the professor said is why he doesn't think Calexit or Texit would happen was that most people on both sides of the divide perceive themselves to be patriotic Americans. So here's a professor. He's saying Calexit isn't going to happen, or it's exceptionally unlikely. And Sean Fettig is agreeing with him for two reasons. Number one, support for Calexit's marginal. Support for Texit is marginal. That means tiny, small. Additionally, everybody in California, even if they talk about how they want to be a separate country, they really view themselves as proud Americans, and they love being seen as Americans. And in their heart, they see themselves as Americans. So Californians want to still be Americans. They view themselves as Americans, and there was never support for secession in California beyond marginal numbers. Those are the top two reasons why Calexit won't happen, according to Professor Timothy Waters in the interview we just showed you. Now, let me show you who Professor Waters is, and then I'm going to show you some information that perhaps the professor was not aware of. This is the interview with Dr. Timothy Waters. Here's the book, Boxing Pandora, sold by Yale Books. It's obviously an intense Yale University Press, so it's a smart book by a smart person. Boxing Pandora, Rethinking Border States and Secession in a Democratic World by Timothy William Waters. He's a professor. Timely and provocative challenge to the foundations of global order. Why should national borders be unchangeable? Here's the authors. Timothy Waters is a professor of law at the Center for Constitutional Democracy at Indiana University. Here is Professor Waters at Indiana University, Bloomington, at the Maurer School of Law. He's a professor of law and an associate director at the Center for Constitutional Democracy. So obviously education, UCLA, hey, nice, Columbia University and Harvard Law School. Juris Doctorate. So he got his law degree from Harvard Law. Obviously, a well-educated person getting a degree from Harvard Law. And obviously, he teaches law at a good university and is a scholar on constitutional democracy. But his arguments against Calexit were not that. His arguments against Calexit and Texit and why they weren't going to happen was that we were marginal. So let me show you this. This is from our friends over at the Texas Nationalist Movement, showing this was a poll that came out 2 years ago. 40% of Texas voters would back secession. The poll's bombshell findings revealed that 40% of voters would support their state secession from the Union if their candidate loses. That's from the Calexit School of Government survey. So I guess 40% of Texas voters is marginal. That's basically under half. 40%, 45% is close to what a person can win the presidency with. But hey, that's marginal. 40% is marginal. That's what the professor's saying. Do you remember this? When we got really big in 2017, it was 1/3. So 32% of Californians backed Calexit. But if you were to talk to the professor, 32% or 1/3 of the world's 5th largest economy is marginal. And 40% of one of the largest states in America is marginal. I think that's ridiculous. Marginal means 5 to 7%. When you're looking at 30, 32, up to 40%, you're not marginal. That's the size of a political party that's well established. So completely disagree with him there. And so does the data. Now, he's also saying it's marginal in Texas, but Texas Republicans endorsed legislation. The state's chairman, Alan West, State Representative Kyle Biederman, State Senator Ted Cruz, State Senator State Party Chairman Alan West. So you have a senator, you have the leader of the political party, you have a sitting representative all talking about secession, but that's marginal. So you have the leader of a political party in Texas talking about secession. You have 1 or 2 senators in Texas talking about secession. You have actual elected officials proposing secession, but that's all marginal. That's just not true. Now, here's the thing when he talks about California, and California won't secede because Californians really just view themselves as Americans. Okay, so I just put in least patriotic state, California, sorry. So this one has New York as the least patriotic, but California at 47 out of 50. So we're 3rd from dead last in lack of patriotism last year. Oh, here's one from 2019. California is one of the least patriotic states. Here's another one from 2019. California, Texas, among the least patriotic states. California listed as one of the least patriotic states. California among the least patriotic states. 2020, the 5 most least patriotic states, including California. 2018, California is one of the least patriotic states. So there is a lot of information about how multiple people in the government of Texas are pursuing secession. And there's a lot of information about how California over the years has been routinely called one of the least patriotic states. I remember this going back to 2015 and 2012. They were talking about that. The most and least patriotic states. Let's see if they have ranking least to greatest. So California is about midway there. It's about 35 in this. That's certainly towards the bottom half of the list. Okay. Anyways, you can see, just type in least patriotic California. California is the least patriotic state. There's tons of articles showing that California is listed as least patriotic. Texas has multiple people elected levels talking about secession. 1/3 of Californians were for secession. 40% of Texans were for secession, which means that when this professor is saying that support for secession is marginal, he's saying that 32% of the world's fifth largest economy is marginal. He's also saying 40% of Texas is marginal. That's ridiculous. He's also saying Calexit won't happen because Californians really just want to be Americans. We have been at the worst ranking of patriotism since 2015, even going back to 2012. That was in my book, California's Next Century. So I wanted to point out to you that the professors, and he's a Yale educated law school professor. That's great. But when he says Calexit won't happen because support is marginal and because Californians secretly want to be Americans, obviously he has never heard of the 32%, or he thinks 1/3 is marginal, which is ridiculous. And he's never seen the multiple surveys showing that Californians are the least patriotic state in America for the last 7 years. So that's why I wanted to bring this up, because these two arguments are not true. That was the point. Jason, exactly right. The article is talking about the least patriotism in California shows that Californians do not have the same sense of fealty that would prevent a Calexit. So we do not share the patriotism the professor suggests, and we have 32%, which is not marginal. So the professor's wrong on 2 counts. Well, that wraps up our show. We have another show I'm going to do in just a second, but I wanted it to be nice and tight and on this one subject. We'll come back in a few minutes with another show about a different topic, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.